All right, good evening, everyone. I believe we are now live here on YouTube, and we have a very special guest today on our Justice in Pieces guest speaker series, all the way out from Sydney right now, the MP from Saanich Gulf Islands, MP Elizabeth May. So, good evening, MP May. I guess it's good afternoon for you.
It's good afternoon out here in British Columbia. Yeah, I'm in. I want to acknowledge that I'm on the traditional territory of the Wet'suwet'en Nation, the Coast Salish nations that have been the traditional owners and occupants of this beautiful part of the world. So my riding name, Saanich-Gulf Islands, is the anglicized, mispronounced version of Wassunnock, which is the nation that includes Coast Salish nations go down into Washington State and all up the coast of British Columbia, including, of course, very heavily southern Vancouver Island and all the Gulf Islands. So honored to be with you today.
So, good afternoon again. And perhaps maybe we can start with maybe telling us a bit about what brought you into politics and, of course, your memorable run as leader of the Green Party.
Well, actually, coincidentally, it was 14 years ago yesterday that the Green Party Leadership Convention took place where I was elected leader. I stepped down as leader last November, so I had a little bit more than 13 years as the leader of the Federal Greens. And our leadership race for my replacement, we have an interim leader right now, terrific, Joanne Roberts, who's in Halifax. Actually, today she's in New Brunswick supporting the New Brunswick Greens because they're in an election campaign right now, incredibly in pandemic. But we're strong across Canada, but we're also a global party, which a lot of people don't know about. So I never thought I was going to go into politics. I had dismissed it. A number of times in my life, I'd been approached by the leaders of almost every party, actually. I'd been approached by leaders going back to Audrey McLaughlin in the NDP, and then Alexa McDonough, and then Jack Layton, and I'd been approached by Jean Chrétien, and then Paul Martin. I'd been approached by Joe Clark. Never approached by Stephen Harper, no surprise. But anyway, I had been always tempted to think, well, maybe I should get into politics. But I resisted it because I felt I was able to make a bigger difference in the work I was doing in civil society. For a long time, I was executive director of the Sierra Club of Canada. And before that, I practiced law. So I know I'm talking to paralegals in training. I want to thank you for choosing that course. That career choice is a really important one for society. Paralegals do such important work. But I practiced law. I graduated from law school in 1983, but I'd actually been practicing in a quite well-known environmental challenge against Agent Orange when I was a volunteer, still a law student, and also one of the plaintiffs. So you couldn't imagine a way to get more implicated in a difficult case than being all of those roles all at once in fighting Agent Orange in a case that got called the herbicide case. But if you were looking it up, you'd find it under Palmer et al. Versus Stora Kopparberg. But it was a big, long chunk of my life fighting Agent Orange. And the day I was supposed to graduate from law school, the graduation day, I was actually in court doing my first cross-examination as an articling student to one of the lawyers we'd hired. Anyway, going into politics was not what I thought I was going to do. But in 2006, I felt that Stephen Harper and the minority conservatives had sort of become government by accident. And I thought we're going to lose a lot of all the stuff I've been fighting for years. So that's what propelled me into deciding to leave Sierra Club of Canada and run for leader of the Green Party.
So, if you go a step backwards there, and what was your motivation to become such a champion for these green initiatives and environmental issues? Do you have a point in history you could think this is where it clicked for me?
I suppose birth. No explanation, honestly, JP. Literally, my mom told me that when I was, I don't know how old, but I wasn't maybe more than about 2. I was talking, but I wasn't walking yet, I think. Not, well, of course, I must have been walking by 2. Anyway, I wasn't very old at all. I was a toddler when I told her I really didn't like airplanes. And she didn't understand why I would say that because I'd never been in one. And my mom says that I said, well, I don't like them because they scratch the sky. And so that struck her as an odd thing for a quite young child to say. And over my lifetime of experience, I mean, I decided I wanted to be an environmental lawyer by the time I was 13. I decided I wanted to fight to protect nature from a very early age. And all I can say is something innate. Plus, I grew up in the countryside. We had lots of animals. We had chickens and sheep and ponies and dogs and cats. And I, for whatever reason, always felt a very strong connection. And of course, I was growing up in the 60s. And so Silent Spring was just, still fairly recent text when I read it when I was about 12. So these things had a big impact on me, and I never really looked back or thought about it much. I know that by grade 10 in 1970, I was fully committed to work for environmental protection, helped organize in April 22nd, 1970, 50 years ago, was the very first Earth Day. And I already had an environmental club at the school that I'd started the Environment Club, and we organized around Earth Day. So from my earliest days, I've been very committed to environmental action and protection.
Now, what would you say to students who are concerned with climate change, given that we have partisan politics? How can we get these changes through in Canada?
Yeah, JP, that you raise a very good point about partisan politics. It should never be the case that climate action is seen as partisan. I mean, you watch a kind of an anti-science movement and think, how could it be that wearing a mask has become political in the United States during COVID? Canadians just don't get that. Why would that be a political thing? This is about public health. If you're in Europe or in many places all around the world, people would also scratch their heads. Why would climate action be seen as partisan? It's science. So if you look at France, for instance, someone like Nicolas Sarkozy, who was president of France, I don't know, more than a decade ago. Nicolas Sarkozy was seen as a right winger. He always was a right winger. He was the first world leader I ever heard say that the climate crisis threatens the survival of human civilization and that we need carbon taxes to be applied on fuel for airplanes. If you look around the world, for instance, look at the UK. No one thinks Boris Johnson is a left winger. But the consistency of policies on climate action don't change in the UK, almost regardless of whether it's Labour or Conservatives who are holding power. Certainly Margaret Thatcher, and everyone would regard her as any left winger would regard Margaret Thatcher as to the right of Attila the Hun. But Margaret Thatcher was a chemist and a scientist. And when she was Prime Minister of the UK, just as when Brian Mulroney was Prime Minister of Canada, the same period of time, late 80s, they put in place the foundations of climate action. Margaret Thatcher put in place the Climate Research Unit at East Anglia University and put in place firm commitments to climate action. Brian Mulroney hosted the first global scientific conference in June of '88 in Toronto. So the idea that it's partisan is something that crept into Canadian politics after Mulroney and after Chrétien. It's entirely due to the anti-science platform of Stephen Harper, who in fundraising literature back in, my memory's pretty good, but I think it was around 2004, 2005, Stephen Harper circulated fundraising letters to conservatives that described the Kyoto Protocol as a socialist scheme to redistribute wealth from industrialized countries and give it to poorer countries. Up until Stephen Harper, climate change in Canada was not seen as a partisan issue. Progressive conservatives completely supported climate action, and actually the commitments from the progressive conservatives in the 1993 campaign were very strong. But the Chrétien Red Book in '93 was stronger, and of course then the Liberals dumped most of their 1993 promises. But it's really recent. So back to your question, what do we do? Well, I think we have to get back to the science. We have to challenge any political leader, political party, or individual MP or MPP for that matter, and say, well, what makes you think climate science is different from COVID science? What makes you think that it's a debatable point and that we're entitled to say, oh, we don't want to do what science demands. We'll do half as much and we'll still be okay. We won't be okay. We have to do what the science demands.
Now, one of the most common misconceptions I'm sure you always have to deal with is, well, the Green Party is, like a one-trick pony. We only have one issue. It's about the environment. Yeah. What do you say to people who point out, well, hey, it's only about the environment. What else does the Green Party offer?
Yeah, well, we've never been a one-issue party, although that's a popular misconception. Probably has something to do with our name. But the reason I stick, it might have been lovely to have a chance to change the name of the Green Party so people recognize that we've always stood for a wide range of issues and concerns. In fact, we were the first party in Canada to call for same-sex marriage. We were the first party in Canada to call for legalization of cannabis. I mean, there are a long list of issues where we were the first. We were the first party in recent history to say it's time for a national pharmacare plan. A national pharmacare. It was in our platform in 2011 when it wasn't in the NDP platform. So we've got 6 core values that define who we are. And they're the 6 core green values, the same ones that define green parties around the world. So Green Party of Germany or Green Party of New Zealand or Green Party of Uganda, we have the same 6 core values. And social justice, respect for diversity, grassroots democracy, ecological wisdom, as well as the commitments that mean that we're not just looking at one issue at a time, but we're looking holistically at everything. So our platform has always been a full platform. If you look at Vision Green on our website, you'll find policies that deal with everything from foreign affairs and disarmament to trade issues, to support for collective bargaining and workers' rights. I mean, we're very much a party that has policies on everything. We campaign on everything, and we're deeply rooted in social justice. So I don't, we were the first party in Canada to call for guaranteed livable income, which right now is becoming really much more mainstreamed. I'm really happy about that. So I don't know how I guess just over time, people realize, oh, gee, the Green Party actually has policies on everything, and we've actually made a difference on a wide range of policies. I was just talking earlier today to the permanent representative from the Palestinian Authority to Canada, and she was thanking me because she said the more she's getting used to living in Canada, she recently took up her post, she finds that it was the Green Party that was more supportive of human rights in Palestine and more clear in our commitment and more effective in pushing for relief funding, like right now, looking at relief funding because the second wave of COVID is hitting Gaza right now. So we're very much in the forefront on many more issues. Although I do tend to think that if you're going to be active, if you're going to be known for being a one-issue party, given the climate emergency, if your one issue is survival, that's not a bad issue to constantly keep as your top priority.
Now, last year, part of your platform was looking forward to 2030. And given what you were talking about COVID-19 this year, is there anything you would revise now of this estimate of 2030 and what can be done?
No, I think our goals are ambitious. We called for Canada to double our current target. Our current target is this, believe it or not, our climate action target is the same one that Stephen Harper put in place 5 years ago, which was a 30% reduction against 2005 levels to be accomplished by 2030. That is exactly half of what science tells us we need to do. So the science hasn't changed much, just hasn't changed at all despite COVID. We are still seeing an accelerating increase in the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. We need to ensure, and the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change made this clear in a very important report that came out in October 2018. Globally, we need to virtually cut in half our emissions globally by 2030. So that means for Canada, a 60% reduction, not 30%, 60% reduction against 2005 levels by 2030. And despite the fact that we will see a reduction in greenhouse gases globally this year as opposed to 2019, it's not a big reduction. It's the International Energy Agency estimates that by the end of 2020, we will only have experienced somewhere between a 4 to 8% decrease in greenhouse gas emissions versus what they were in 2019. And here's the shocker: to get to where we need to be to avoid going past some pretty critical red lines in the atmosphere, we need year after year after year, every single year of this decade, we need a 7 to 8% reduction in global greenhouse gases every year. So we don't want to have the equivalent of the kind of economic hit of a COVID pandemic to accomplish the 8% reductions. Again, we may get between 4 to 8% this year in terms of reductions. We can't do it through shutting down our economy. We have to transition our economy quite rapidly so that we're not using fossil fuels.
Now, how is the House of Commons been running for you during COVID-19? And what are your thoughts on it being prorogued in the middle of this pandemic?
Yeah, I have been enormously encouraged by how nonpartisan we've been as members of parliament for the most part. I mean, I never forget the feeling. It was sort of surrealistic. It seems so long ago now, but Friday morning, it was a Friday the 13th. Not that that meant that my day was doomed. I'm not superstitious, but as it was Friday, March 13th. And Fridays in parliament, the House is virtually empty. Most MPs have headed home. As it happened, I was sitting with my Green Party colleague from Vancouver Island, Paul Manley, and the two of us were sitting there when we found out, because we're always the last to know because we don't have official party status, that all the bigger parties had organized a unanimous consent motion to adjourn Friday the 13th and adjourn until April 20th. And at the time I thought, wow, that's a really long time. Do we really need to be adjourned that long because of this pandemic? But I mean, it was clear we couldn't continue to meet. We were potentially vectors of disease moving from Ottawa back to our own ridings. It just really did seem surrealistic. And then by the time I went back to Parliament, of all things, on Good Friday of Easter weekend, to sit on the Saturday of Easter weekend to pass emergency measures. That was April 7th, 8th, emergency measures for COVID relief and response. It began to be clear that we weren't going to come back as normal April 20th. Then we began to know we have to flatten the curve. We knew what that meant. So in that period of time, through March, April, and May, was remarkably nonpartisan. And then I think that the Conservatives began to look at the polling numbers and think, geez, the Liberals are doing well out of this. We got to stop them. I think that Canadians expect us to set partisanship aside until we're through this. I did not like the prorogation. I'll be clear about that. Proroguing would have been appropriate to say prorogue on September 15th and resume September 23rd, because proroguing is a restart. It's to say the agenda Parliament set for itself in the speech from the throne that started this Parliament, which was on December 5th, 2019, right? So that agenda doesn't look realistic now because COVID-19 isn't mentioned. The agenda December 5th, 2019 thought we were going to be potentially balancing the budget within a year or two. No, it did not anticipate a $350 billion deficit from this year, which I think we needed to do, and I think it was the right thing to do, but it was because of a pandemic. So I support the note of a reset. I support the notion that we need to prorogue and have a new speech from the throne that takes into account where we are now. What I find inappropriate was pulling the plug on the parliamentary committee work we were doing, like this on Zoom. I'd be on the Finance Committee, the Government Operations Committee, the Fisheries Committee, connecting with my colleagues, and we had hybrid parliaments. I was able to, from home like this, in Parliament, put a direct question to the Minister of Environment, to the Prime Minister, and get an answer. I actually think that the question period process worked better in pandemic than it was working in our normal rules. So it's been challenging, but I think overall democracy has been working well. Parliament has been working well, but we have to really figure out how to vote remotely. That's the key missing piece right now. Is in order for Parliament to work, we have to be able to pass legislation, and in order to be able to pass legislation, we have to be able to vote remotely.
Now I'm a teacher, and part of my job is giving out grades. And so at this point, we had the pandemic, but the government, Justin Trudeau's government, has been in power for a few years, right? So what grade would you give Prime Minister Trudeau and the Liberals in addressing green initiatives?
Oh, an F. But the problem is if I give the Trudeau Liberals an F for climate initiatives, that makes it look like they're just as bad as the Conservatives. And how do you give an F triple minus to the Conservatives? I mean, the problem is you can't judge how a government is doing on climate by their lofty goals or their words. You have to look at into greenhouse gases. So the last year for which we have statistics is 2018. And 2018, greenhouse gas emissions rose again. So the Liberals have been in power since 2015. They've kept Harper's target. They're not on track to hit Harper's target. And Harper's target is half as much as what we need to do. So it's one, I'm very much a cheerleader for stronger commitments. I'm prepared to push and cheer for the new Minister of Finance, if she does what needs to be done, for the Prime Minister to change our target. If they actually live up to it, and we'll find out September 23rd when we hear the new speech from the throne. If that speech from the throne says that the Liberal platform commitment that we have carbon neutrality by 2030 can only be reached if we double our target for 2030, right? What did I say? Carbon neutrality by 2050. To do that, we need to at least have doubled our current target to achieve 60% reductions by 2030. If they actually start putting in place the measures to restart our economy that are firmly wedded to climate commitments, then we can get to where we need to be, and I'll give them an A because I'm a fair grader. But it has to be based on, we're looking at a carbon budget. Physics, atmospheric physics isn't interested in pretty words and slogans. The atmosphere only wants what, the atmosphere doesn't negotiate with humanity. Those fixed rules of atmospheric chemistry and physics are as fixed as COVID viral activity. You don't negotiate with a virus. You start, you shut down your economy and tell people to avoid congregating to avoid losing millions of lives. The climate emergency threatens many more lives than the COVID emergency. And we somehow think we can, that we have time for delay and time for incremental tweaks, and we don't.
So would you say that is the number one green issue that should be the focus of the Canadian government when Parliament resumes?
It's an economic issue, it's a green issue, but it has to be firmly rooted in social justice. So we are very much looking at a guaranteed livable income to replace the CERB. The CERB has kind of been dipping our toes in the waters of basic income talk. Let's really do it. We also have to look long term. What if this pandemic is with us for another couple of years? We have to look at really boosting our healthcare system. We have to make sure that long-term care facilities don't leave seniors as vulnerable as what we've seen the last few months. There are a lot of priorities, but everything we do must be grounded in ensuring that the biosphere remains habitable for humanity for forever. And if we miss the opportunity in the next couple of years to set that course, we can miss it forever, which is why, because the physics and the chemistry of the atmosphere aren't going to budge, we have to really take massive steps towards energy efficiency, only using renewable energy, moving away from fossil fuels quite rapidly. And we've set that out. You can find our vision for the future on the Green Party website on a document called Reimagining Our Future, which of course is also grounded in justice for Indigenous nations and peoples. And it's unfortunate you can't treat out these issues as sequential. We have to do them all at the same time. But that's it. The good news is that the climate measures in the budget we advance are also the very best way to restart our economy, according to some really cutting edge work by Nobel Prize winning economist Joseph Stiglitz and a group with whom he worked, put out a paper in the Oxford Economic Review. It's now a couple months ago, that having interviewed over 230 leading economists and members of central government banks within the G20, their conclusion was these are the steps that will recover our economy and restart it most efficiently, is things like moving to renewable energy, investing in renewable energy, investing in energy efficiency, and getting people busy with tree planting. These were some of the measures chosen by economists as being some of the best ways to restart the world's economy and make sure that we actually reduce greenhouse gases at the same time.
Now, you mentioned Indigenous people, and we're seeing with all people of color right now, big issue of systemic racism, especially what's going on in the United States this week. What can we be doing better here in Canada to avoid all of these situations?
Well, I think it's important to acknowledge, I mean, for people who of privilege, like me, I mean, privilege is not an economic class, or privilege is white skin. Let me be really clear, right? So you look, once you sort of begin to acknowledge that as a person of privilege, then you can see exactly how clear it is that racism is systemic. I've called for it on the floor of the House of Commons, and Greens have called for us to look at systemic racism within police forces and our military by rooting out people, and this could be done just by checking people's social media profiles, people who align themselves with white supremacist groups. Now, I'm 66 years old, and I never thought as a Canadian that I'd be talking about white supremacist groups in Canada. But there's no question that the election of Donald Trump 4 years ago gave oxygen to some aspects of society that I thought were long gone, dead, and buried, like neo-Nazis, like white supremacists. I didn't think we'd be talking about them as a factor in real life, but they are a factor in real life. And I think just recently CBC uncovered what I feared was the case, was that there were white supremacists and in our military and in our police forces. Why wouldn't there be? So we need to root that out as a priority issue. The killings recently in Wisconsin with people, with a murderer who thinks that he was part of a militia, who killed people in a protest who were nonviolent. I mean, those are not, it's very chilling and very worrying. So systemic racism does exist. We know that Black teenagers are far more likely to be pulled over by the cops. We know racial profiling is a thing. We know that carding in Toronto was a terrible thing. It's time to actually be prepared to say that people of privilege have to take those steps to first acknowledge privilege and fight for and defend Indigenous rights, which also means we can't afford to continue to leave. More than a year ago, we had the tabling of the report of the inquiry into missing and murdered Indigenous women and girls. That report has still not had an official response from the Government of Canada. And we know that, as we see, I mean, I'm very involved because I know the family of Chantel Moore, who was murdered by the Edmundston police in June in Edmundston, New Brunswick. Less than a week later, a Mi'kmaq Indigenous man, Indigenous to New Brunswick. Chantal Moore's family and traditions are Indigenous to Vancouver Island. She was a member of the New Chalmers First Nation and was living in territory of Mi'kmaq, Maliseet, and Passamaquoddy peoples. But to have two killings of Indigenous peoples within a week of each other in New Brunswick is very, very distressing. And in the case of Chantel Moore, both of them were killed in so-called wellness checks. So there's a lot of work to be done on this. We really need to ask what the heck is going on if a wellness check, so-called, ends up having people found dead. I don't know what the temperature is like right now, JP, with the decision of the review of the killing of Regis Paquette, but I'm wondering, she fell to her death from that apartment building. I'm wondering, I think we definitely need to hear all the details. We need a coroner's inquest into what happened there, that only police were present in her apartment, and yet they say there was no culpability by the police. Well, I'm prepared to believe them, but I sure need to see the evidence. Regis Paquette. I'm always saying I need that name in front of me when I say it from memory, but I'm very, that was also a wellness check. There's something very concerning when a wellness check leads to the morgue.
Maybe switching gears here to your future. 10 months ago, approximately, you announced that you're going to step down as the leader of the Green Party. What was that decision based on? Why step down at that point?
Well, I stepped down, and so it was a promise I made her. And I promised her before the 2019 election that for sure I would not be the leader of the Green Party going into the next federal election. When it was a minority election, minority parliament elected, which I think is great. I much prefer minority parliaments to majorities. There's much more scope for collaboration and cooperation. It's a better system. When it was a minority parliament, though, you start realizing, okay, how long do minority parliaments generally sit before the next election? So working backwards, I realized I should step down right now to make sure there's time for a leadership race and a new leader of the Greens elected in time to be known by the public before the next election. Now, if we're in an election this fall, I will have miscalculated. I hope we're not in an election this fall, because the next leader of the Green Party of Canada will be elected on October 3rd. If you're at all interested in the Green Party and you're watching this now, please join. We have 9 candidates at the moment. I think some won't make it to the ballot by September 3rd. Each candidate has to have put in their final set of signatures to support their candidacy and their final financial commitment, and that comes to a total of $30,000 per candidate is required. It's a lot less than the Conservative Party or the NDP, but it's a lot more than what we've ever put in place in the past. In any case, by September 3rd, if you're a member of the Green Party, you can vote, and the next leader's identity will be revealed to us all when we go through. It'll be something, I can't say it'll be something like the Conservative convention, because I don't think we're going to use automated machines that slice up the ballots. And it's I think we're going to be in better shape to actually know, but it is like the Conservatives, a preferential ballot, and there'll be somewhere between, I don't know, 5 to 9 candidates' names on the ballot. And one of those people will be the new leader of the Green Party of Canada. I will contest my own seat again. I want to continue as the Member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands and be in a position to support the next leader. So, if you think about the annals of Canadian politics, there's not a lot of times that a leader who's outgoing sticks around to support the next leader. The last time I think I saw good succession planning happening in Canadian politics, it was way back when Alexa McDonough ran in her own seat in Halifax to support the new leader, who was Jack Layton. So that was a long time ago, but that's what I aim to do. I aim to see me in a position to go campaign across the country and elect as many of those candidates who are currently running for leadership, so that they're part of a stronger, bigger caucus of Green members of Parliament. Right now, we're 3 federal Greens, and we have Greens elected in British Columbia and Ontario and New Brunswick and Prince Edward Island, where they're the official opposition. But we need the Green Party movement to keep building, because we deliver better results and we deliver a better parliament when we're in it. I don't think we're ever going to get elected a majority parliament, but we make a big difference as a smaller caucus than many of the bigger caucuses do, because we just don't waste time in kind of silly bugger theatrics like, try to, I don't know. I find it so annoying. I find politics quite annoying, and I really don't like what I sometimes describe it as being like watching dogs chasing cars. Like, oh, there's an issue. Woof, 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 woof. Oh, there's another issue. Woof, 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 woof. And they just, they're not getting anything done. They're just chasing their tails and trying to score points off each other. Well, I don't think Canadians really want that kind of politics, and I hope that I'm right, and that when we have the next federal election in Canada, there'll be more Greens in caucus, and we'll finally break that barrier of 12 that will give us the kind of funding that the other parties have, to have a research staff, to have the ability to actually sit on committees and vote on committees. Because right now, when I mention all the committee work I do, I'm there essentially with a right to sit at the table and the occasional discretionary ability to, on the part of the chair, to let me ask questions, but I can never vote. And that's really, I think, not very democratic, but I'm always optimistic that we're going to get change.
As the Green Party looks forward, perhaps this is a time for you to do some reflection on your time as leader. What are you most proud of? And if you could do anything differently, what would you do?
Well, I suppose I'm pretty proud of being in the world of countries that use first past the post to elect their members of parliament. I was only the second member of parliament in the world elected under a first past the post system. It's a pretty anti-democratic system. We really do need the move to proportional representation, which around the world, most democracies by far elect using a system of fair voting. But my colleague and a dear friend, I love her dearly, Carolyn Lucas, was the first person in a first past the post system to ever be elected as a Green. She remains the member of parliament for Brighton Pavilion in the Parliament of Westminster in the UK. But Carolyn remains the only member of parliament for the Greens in the Palace of Westminster in UK. So I'm pretty proud of the fact that in Canada, I got elected in 2011, and then 2012 we had Greens elected in British Columbia. As I mentioned, we've made a lot of progress, and now I sit with Paul Manley for Nanaimo Ladysmith and Jenica Atwin from Fredericton. I mean, 3 Green MPs may not seem like a lot, but we're the only Green party in a first past the post country that's made this kind of a dent, and we'll make a bigger dent, and we'll keep working for fair voting. Of other accomplishments, I've had 2 pieces of legislation pass under my name, which is highly unusual. I brought in a bill that passed in the Parliament, passed by 2012. No, it was introduced in 2012. We got it passed by 2015. A bill to bring in a federal Lyme disease strategy. It hasn't made as much of a difference as I had hoped it would. It has really increased the understanding and awareness of Lyme disease, and it did bring in $8 million worth of funding for research into Lyme disease, but that was my own private member's bill. And in the last parliament, we got passed a bill in my name, which had started in the Senate under Senator Wilfred Moore, but to end the keeping of whales and dolphins in captivity. So it's extremely unusual for any one MP to have any bill passed in their name. In my case, it's 2. So I'm proud of that. But I think the thing that I'm probably most proud of my work in Parliament has been that I've managed to stay pretty good friends with all the MPs, regardless of party. And I've also stood consistently for greater respect in Parliament, for understanding and respecting our rules. And I don't think I'm letting a cat out of the bag to tell you, JP, that if I have the honor of being elected again in Saanich Gulf Islands, I want to run for Speaker of the House. My friend Anthony Rota is doing a fine job right now, but I think if I could contribute something substantial and long-lasting to parliamentary democracy, it would be to demonstrate how a Speaker of the House can actually get Parliament to work better by getting more of the people in Parliament to respect each other more and work better together, which is, it's a secret ballot for Speaker of the House. I have no idea if I could become Speaker, but that's my next objective. Having given up on becoming Prime Minister, I think I could make a difference for democracy if I could be elected Speaker of the House.
Now, October the 3rd is coming up there. And what advice would you offer to whoever becomes the new leader of the Green Party as your successor?
Well, as I listen to some of them who are running for leadership, I think my first piece of advice is read our Constitution. Some of them seem to think that they can take the party in their direction or stand for these policies. Well, that's great, but the job description of the leader of the Green Party of Canada is to be the party's chief spokesperson. So again, of those 6 core Green values, a pretty fundamental one is grassroots democracy, which means that the leader of the Green Party of Canada does not dictate policy. No staff reports to the leader of the Green Party of Canada. You have absolutely no power whatsoever. So I'd say the next leader, get used to it. You're going to get blamed for everything, and you have no power to make anything happen. So your job is to inspire people, mobilize people, and take the message that comes from our members and take it forward to Canadians. And one of those key messages is we don't think political parties should be calling the shots. We think members of Parliament should represent their constituents. It's a very different set of power dynamics that the Green Party leader is there to provide. What, if you're looking up different styles of leadership, is basically servant leadership. Your job is to work for everybody and to help explain to Canadians where Greens are coming from. And it's a position of, it's a real honor to serve as leader of the Green Party of Canada. but it's not being the boss. And so I'm looking forward to, there are a lot of very strong candidates running, and some of them totally get this point that no, you're not making up new policy. You represent the policies that are accepted at a biennial general meeting by the membership after vigorous debate and usually by consensus. We have a very different way of coming to decisions than other parties. We use consensus decision making under something called our green rules, and we are really committed to our core green value. And another thing I will recommend to the next leader is get to know your colleagues, because for me, the only peer group I have as leader of the Green Party of Canada, or former leader now, has been other Green leaders in Canada and around the world. So my peer group is, people like Mike Schreiner, leader of the Green Party of Ontario, people like James Shaw, dear friend, who's the co-leader of the Greens in New Zealand and right now in an election in pandemic. But when I talk to James Shaw, or I mentioned Carolyn Lucas, people who are, or the former leader of the Green Party of Australia, Christine Milne, or Bob Brown from Australia, former leader, we're the only ones who actually understand what it's like to be quote unquote leader of a party that by our very philosophy and values and principles and constitution don't let a leader do the things that other parties assume the leader's going to do, like be the boss. Right? So my peer group of people with whom I can vent, my therapists, are the other Green Party leaders around the world and in Canada, can say, oh yeah, I know, isn't it crazy? And the membership thinks you can do blah, 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 but you're not allowed to do it. And meanwhile, the public thinks you can do blah, 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 but you're not allowed to do it. But look at all the stuff we've accomplished. And so when I go to global climate negotiations, there are ministers negotiating on behalf of other governments who are my Green colleagues. So and through them, I get to make a much bigger difference in global climate negotiations than if I didn't have those Green colleagues. The Minister of Environment you wouldn't think that Luxembourg was a big deal, but she makes a big difference negotiating on behalf of Luxembourg, just as the Deputy Prime Minister of Sweden, who's a Green, makes a really big difference. And those connections are very, very cool. And I think the next leader of the Green Party of Canada will find it a real revelation to see what a difference we make as a global Green movement.
Perfect. So thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. You've certainly inspired and mobilized your party through your time. So congratulations for all you've accomplished. Do you have any final words of advice for my students, perhaps if they're interested in environmental law like yourself, or even into politics? What advice could you offer for my paralegal students?
Jump in with both feet. The world needs you. Canada's democracy needs you. If you're interested in any one of the, cruise the websites and figure out which party kind of seems to resonate with your values. Every party has a rule that you can only join one party at a time. I hate to let the cat out of the bag, but no party has any way of enforcing that. So join them all. Figure it out. Get on the inside. Alexa's laughing her head over there. My assistant's saying, "Oh my God, what'd she say?" But my late sister-in-law, and it was funny, sad, we never got to know each other as sisters-in-law. She died before I married John Kidder. But Margot Kidder, who was a well-known actress in her day, she played Lois Lane in Superman, and she was a real political activist. Like me, she got arrested blockading a pipeline. But she spoke at a conference that I helped organize back in believe it or not, what year? I've got to remember because I've got to skip a couple of, it was in that conference was in 1986 that Margot Kidder spoke in Ottawa at a conference called People on the Planet. She said what I just said. No party can stop you. Join them all. Figure it out. As the people who belong to political parties in this country end up having a disproportionately large impact on policymaking, because the vast majority of Canadians never join a political party. Like 85% of Canadians say they'll never join a political party. And I don't blame you, because they're pretty scummy, except for us. But still, if you join, you find out what's going on the inside. Figure out which one you like. Dip your toes in the water and figure it out. And then maybe volunteer on a campaign or run yourself. So you have a really big impact if you do that. If you don't want to ever be partisan. Think about amplifying your political footprint. I mean, I would say shrink your ecological footprint, but grow your political footprint. So write letters to the editor of mainstream newspapers. Contact, if you see CBC or CTV doing something right or wrong, contact them and tell them. I'm absolutely enraged that CBC put a climate denier on their website yesterday. I haven't had time to take action on that yet, but I should have been calling the CBC and saying, what do you mean putting Ross McKittrick on your website as if he's a climate scientist, for heaven's sakes? Don't you know anything yet? So speak up, speak out, contacting media, paying attention to social media. There's a lot in the comment sections of every newspaper that I sometimes say, like, adopt one of them and weed it like a garden. And if you see something there that looks wrong, point out the right thing, because the authentic, the truthful thing, because so many individuals are intimidated by, well, trolls and bots and whatnot. So it's important to speak up and speak out. You can be a very effective citizen without ever leaving your home if you want to. And when COVID's over and you find out that there's a demonstration for Black Lives Matter and you want to, don't sit back, go participate, show up. If there's a protest for climate action, show up. Everything you can do as a citizen makes a difference.
Perfect. So thank you very much once again. All the best in your continued work there as MP. And we really appreciate you taking the time to join us. So take care.
It was really a pleasure. Good luck in all of your careers. And thank you, JP, for having me today.
Pleasure's all mine. Thank you again.